I still remember the exact moment I realized my best friend had turned me into a criminal. I was sitting in a conference room at Data Shield Solutions, watching their CTO's face go from confused to disgusted as he pulled up forensic logs that appeared to show my system as the origin point of a data breach that had exposed 43,000 customer records. Joel sat beside me, his hand on my shoulder, in what everyone in that room interpreted as loyal support, while I watched my entire career start to collapse. What they couldn't see, what I couldn't see yet, was that Joel's concerned expression masked something that would take me 6 months of obsessive investigation to fully understand. He had engineered every second of my destruction, and he'd been doing it for almost 2 years, but I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how deep this betrayal went, you need to understand what Joel and I were to each other before everything turned to ash. I met Joel Hendricks in the fall of 2012 during our first week at Berkeley. I was the scholarship kid from Sacramento who'd spent high school building computer security systems in my bedroom instead of going to parties. My mum had worked double shifts at a nursing home and weekend housekeeping jobs to give me every opportunity she could, and I'd repaid her sacrifice by being exactly the kind of socially awkward tech genius that every college orientation mixer is designed to torture. I was standing alone near the snack table at some mandatory residence hall event, trying to figure out how long I had to stay before I could escape back to my room, when Joel appeared beside me with 2 cups of truly terrible punch and a grin that somehow made the whole awkward situation feel less oppressive. "You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else," he said, handing me one of the cups. "Same. Want to ditch this and grab actual food?" That's how it started. That simple. Joel had this way of making social interaction feel effortless. He came from money, old East Coast family wealth that he wore lightly, never showing off but never pretending it didn't exist either. Where I was angular and uncomfortable in my own skin, Joel moved through the world with the kind of ease that only comes from never having to worry about whether you belong. We became inseparable that first semester. Joel helped me navigate the social maze of college life, introducing me to people, dragging me to parties when I would have hidden in the library, teaching me how to talk to women without not to the computer science courses his family expected him to pass. Joel is smart, genuinely smart, but technical thinking didn't come naturally to him the way it did to me. I'd spend hours walking him through programming concepts, breaking down complex systems into pieces he could understand. "You're saving my ass, Marcus," he'd say, usually around 2 in the morning when we were both exhausted from another study session. "I don't know what I'd do without you, man." "You'd probably be getting more sleep and having more fun," I'd reply. "Fuck that. This is more fun. We're building something here, you know? A real partnership." And I believed him. God, I believed every word. Those first years at Berkeley were formative in ways I didn't fully appreciate until much later. Joel and I developed a rhythm that felt natural, inevitable even. He'd handle the social engineering of our college experience, talking our way into parties we weren't technically invited to, charming professors into deadline extensions, networking with people who might be useful later. I'd handle the technical challenges, debugging his code at 3 in the morning, explaining cryptographic principles until they clicked, building the actual substance behind whatever ambitious project we'd decided to tackle. I remember one particular night during our sophomore year. We'd been assigned a group project in our advanced algorithms class, and our other 2 team members had flaked out completely. Joel and I were in the computer lab, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and crumpled paper, trying to implement a complex sorting algorithm that was due in 8 hours. "This is impossible," Joel said. running his hands through his hair in frustration. I don't understand why this keeps breaking. I leaned over to look at his screen. The code was a mess. Logical errors compounded by syntax mistakes. The kind of thing that happens when you're exhausted and trying to force understanding that hasn't quite solidified yet. "Here," I said, pulling my chair closer. "You're thinking about this wrong. The algorithm isn't trying to sort everything at once. It's making small, local decisions that accumulate into a global solution. Watch." I rewrote his function, talking through each line as I typed. Joel watched intently, asking questions when he got confused, making notes in his characteristic scrawl. By the time the sun came up, we had a working implementation, and Joel actually understood how it worked. "You're a fucking wizard, Marcus," he said, grinning despite the exhaustion. "Seriously, I get it now, like actually get it." "You just needed to see it from a different angle." "No, I needed you to show me the different angle. That's the thing. You don't just understand this shit. You know how to make other people understand it. That's rare, man." At the time, I'd felt proud, useful, like I was contributing something meaningful to our friendship. Looking back now, I wonder if Joel was already learning how to manipulate my need to be needed. If he was cataloging my weaknesses even then, storing away knowledge about what motivated me, what made me feel valued, what would make me trust him completely. But I'm getting cynical again. Not everything was manipulation. I have to believe that, or the past 12 years of my life become nothing but a lie. We graduated together in 2016, walking across that stage in our caps and gowns with our families cheering. My mother was there, looking older than her 53 years, but radiant with pride. Joel's parents came too, his father in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my entire graduation outfit, his mother dripping with jewelry that spoke of generations of wealth. They were polite to my mother, gracious even, but there was a distance there that reminded me that Joel and I came from fundamentally different worlds. Joel used some of his family connections to land us both positions at a mid-sized cybersecurity consulting firm in San Francisco called Secure Point Solutions. It wasn't prestigious, but it was real work with real clients, and I threw myself into it completely. Joel handled client relations and business development. He was brilliant at it, using that natural charm to build trust and close deals, while I did the deep technical work that actually kept systems secure. Our boss at Secure Point was a man named Richard Torres, a grizzled veteran of the cybersecurity industry who'd seen every hack, every exploit, every variation of corporate negligence that existed. He took a liking to me early on, probably because I reminded him of himself at that age, obsessive about details, paranoid about vulnerabilities, constitutionally incapable of accepting good enough when it came to protecting client data. "Chen," he told me during one of our regular one-on-ones, "you've got something special. The technical skills are important, sure, but lots of people have technical skills. What you have is integrity. You actually give a shit about protecting people's information. Don't lose that." "I won't," I promised. "People will test you. Clients who want to cut corners, colleagues who think security is optional, executives who see your work as a cost center rather than a necessity. You'll be tempted to compromise, to make things easier, to go along to get along. Don't." I carried that advice with me like a talisman. Integrity in security work wasn't just about being good at your job. It was about being trustworthy with other people's most sensitive data. It was a responsibility I took seriously, maybe too seriously, given how my social life consisted almost entirely of work and occasional beers with Joel. By 2019, Joel and I had built enough of a reputation at Secure Point that starting our own consulting practice seemed not just possible, but inevitable. We'd brought in several major clients, had a track record of successful audits and incident responses, and Richard Torres himself encouraged us to strike out on our own. "You two are wasted here," he said, during what would be our last performance review at Secure Point. "Hendricks has the client relationships, Chen has the technical chops. You're leaving money on the table working for me. Go start your own firm. Chen Hendricks Security Solutions." We had business cards printed before we'd even signed the LLC paperwork. Joel insisted our names should be alphabetical, not hierarchical. "We're equals in this, Marcus. Always have been, always will be." The first 2 years were brutal in the way that starting any business is brutal. Long hours, uncertain income, the constant stress of keeping clients happy while trying to land new ones. We rented a cramped third-floor walk-up office in Soma that we could barely afford, furnished it with IKEA desks and chairs we assembled ourselves, and plastered the walls with whiteboards where I diagrammed security architectures, and Joel would sketch out business development strategies. But we were good at what we did. I'd build comprehensive security audits and penetration tests that identified vulnerabilities before malicious actors could exploit them, and Joel would translate my technical findings into language that C-suite executives could understand and act on. We complemented each other perfectly. Our first major client was a healthcare data management company called MediSecure. They handled patient records for a network of urgent care clinics across Northern California, which meant they were sitting on exactly the kind of sensitive data that made them a high-value target for cyber criminals. Their existing security was a patchwork of outdated systems and half-implemented best practices, exactly the kind of situation that kept me up at night. I spent 3 weeks embedded in their infrastructure, mapping every connection, testing every endpoint, documenting every vulnerability. I found things that made my skin crawl. Unencrypted databases containing thousands of patient records, authentication systems that could be bypassed with basic SQL injection, backup systems that had never been tested and probably wouldn't work in an actual emergency. Joel turned my technical report into a presentation that scared MediSecure's executives into allocating a serious budget for remediation. We spent the next 6 months working with their IT team to rebuild their security infrastructure from the ground up. It was exhausting, meticulous work, but when we finished, I could sleep at night knowing that those patient records were protected by something approaching actual security. MediSecure became our showcase client. Joel used that success to land 3 more healthcare clients in the following year. We were building momentum, reputation, credibility. The business was actually working. I should have been happy. I should have been proud of what we were building together. Instead, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. The first crack in my perception of reality came in early 2021, about a year before everything exploded. Joel showed up to our shared office space in a new Tesla Model S. "Jesus, Joel," I said, looking up from the security audit I was writing. "When did you get that?" He grinned, spinning the key fob on his finger. "Yesterday. Beautiful, right? Want to take it for a drive after work?" "How the hell did you afford a Tesla? We're not exactly rolling in money here." Something flickered across his face, too quick for me to identify. "Family stuff," he said, his tone shifting to something more closed off. "My grandfather's estate finally settled. Little inheritance windfall." I nodded, accepting this explanation because why wouldn't I? Joel came from money. Inheritance made sense. But a small part of my brain, the part that had spent years identifying anomalies in system behavior, registered the explanation as slightly off. Joel's grandfather had died 3 years earlier. Estate settlements don't usually take that long unless there's litigation involved, and Joel had never mentioned any family conflict. I pushed the thought aside. We were friends, business partners, brothers, really, in every way that mattered. If Joel said it was inheritance, it was inheritance, but the anomalies kept accumulating. 2 months later, Joel moved out of his modest apartment in the Sunset District and into a sleek high-rise in Russian Hill with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge. The rent on that place had to be at least $6,000 a month, probably more. I knew what our business was generating in revenue, and I knew what our expenses were. Even accounting for Joel's family money, the math didn't quite work. "Another inheritance thing?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light when he invited me over to see the new place. "Got a good deal on the lease," he said smoothly. "Friend of the family owns the building. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it is. I didn't come from the kind of family where people owned buildings and offered sweetheart deals to their kids' friends. I came from a mother who'd worked herself nearly to death so I could have a chance at a different life. Every dollar I made went into our business or my own modest savings. The idea of dropping $6,000 or $7,000 a month on rent was incomprehensible to me. Joel's apartment was everything mine wasn't. Floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the bay, hardwood floors that probably cost more per square foot than my entire monthly rent, a kitchen with appliances that looked like they belonged in a professional restaurant. He'd furnished it with pieces that had that expensive minimalist aesthetic, the kind where each item costs thousands of dollars but is designed to look simple. "This is incredible," I said, walking to the windows and looking out at the view. The Golden Gate Bridge was perfectly framed in the distance, the water sparkling in the late afternoon sun. "Right?" Joel appeared beside me with 2 beers. "I figured if we're going to be successful, we should start living like we're successful. Mindset matters, you know." "We're not successful yet," I said. "We're still building. Most of our revenue goes right back into operating costs." "Your revenue goes back into operating costs," Joel corrected gently. "I've got other income streams, family investments, some consulting work on the side. I'm not living beyond my means, Marcus. I'm just living differently than you." It was a reasonable explanation. It fit the dynamic we'd always had. Joel from wealth, me from nothing. Different resources, different approaches to money. I had no right to question how he spent his income. But something about the conversation felt off. The way Joel had corrected me, the subtle implication that I was being judgmental or small-minded for questioning his lifestyle. It was the first time I'd felt actively managed by him, like he was using conversational techniques to redirect my concerns rather than addressing them directly. I drank my beer and changed the subject, but the unease stayed with me. Over the next several months, the warning signs accumulated like water seeping into a foundation. Joel started dressing better. Expensive suits that he definitely hadn't owned before, watches that cost more than our monthly office rent. He took clients to dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, even for special occasions. When I mentioned it, he'd laugh it off. "Got to look successful to be successful, Marcus. You should invest in your appearance more. First impressions matter." "I'd rather invest in actually being good at what we do." "That's why we work, man. You handle the substance, I handle the style. Both matter." It was a reasonable explanation. It fit the dynamic we'd always had, but the discomfort in my gut wouldn't quite go away. I started paying more attention to Joel's patterns. Not systematically, not like an investigation, just the kind of casual observation that happens when you spend most of your waking hours with someone. And what I noticed made that discomfort grow. Joel had started taking more calls outside the office. He'd get messages on his phone and step out into the hallway, returning 10 or 15 minutes later without explanation. When I asked about them, he'd say they were client calls or family matters, but there was something evasive in his tone that hadn't been there before. He'd also started working odd hours from home. I'd send him technical questions or client updates in the evening and not get responses until the next morning, even though I could see from his social media that he was clearly awake and online. When we'd compare schedules to coordinate client meetings, there were blocks of time he'd mark as busy without explanation. None of it was damning on its own. People are entitled to privacy, to personal time, to aspects of their lives that don't involve their business partners, but the pattern felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. I told myself I was being paranoid. The stress of running a business, the pressure of being responsible for protecting clients' most sensitive data, the general anxiety of trying to build something meaningful, it was all making me see shadows where none existed. Then came October 2021, when one of our clients, a mid-sized financial services firm called Presidio Capital, reported a significant data breach. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Joel and I were both in the office, working on separate projects, when my phone rang with a number I recognized as Presidio's CTO, a man named Derek Morrison. "Marcus, we've got a situation," Derek said without preamble. "We're seeing signs of unauthorized access to our customer database. Can you get over here?" My stomach dropped. Presidio Capital was one of our anchor clients. I'd personally designed their security infrastructure, implemented their authentication systems, set up their monitoring and logging. A breach there wasn't just a business problem, it was a personal failure. "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my laptop bag. Joel looked up from his computer. "What's wrong?" "Presidio's reporting a potential breach. I need to get over there and figure out what happened." "I'll come with you," Joel said immediately, closing his laptop. "You focus on the technical investigation. I'll handle client management." That's what partners do. They support each other during crises. They divide responsibilities and tackle problems together. So why did Joel's immediate offer to come along make my skin prickle with unease? We drove to Presidio's offices in Soma in Joel's Tesla. The whole way there, he kept up a steady stream of reassurance. "Don't spiral on this, Marcus. Breaches happen, even to the best security teams. What matters is how we respond." "It shouldn't have happened," I said, my hands clenched in my lap. "I designed this system to be bulletproof. Multiple layers of authentication, encryption at rest and in transit, comprehensive logging. Someone would have to have internal knowledge of the architecture to get through it this cleanly." "Then someone on their end fucked up," Joel said. "Weak password, phishing attack, social engineering. You can't protect against human stupidity." But even as he said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. Human error creates certain types of breaches. Sloppy, obvious, easily traceable. What Derek had described on the phone sounded surgical, precise. The work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. At Presidio's offices, Derek met us in their conference room along with their head of IT, a woman named Sandra Kim, who I'd worked closely with during the security implementation. Both of them looked exhausted and stressed. "Talk me through what you're seeing," I said, setting up my laptop to access their systems. Derek pulled up logs on the room's main screen. "Unauthorized access to our customer database starting approximately 48 hours ago. The access used valid credentials and came through authenticated channels, so our monitoring didn't flag it as suspicious until we noticed unusual data exfiltration patterns." I studied the logs, my mind racing through possibilities. The access patterns were clean, too clean. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were looking for and how to extract it without triggering obvious alarms. "What data was accessed?" I asked. "Customer account information, social security numbers, financial records," Sandra said quietly. "Approximately 43,000 customer records total. 43,000 people. 43,000 lives potentially impacted because of a security system I'd built and certified as secure. I dove into the forensic analysis, tracing the breach back through their systems, following the digital breadcrumbs that the attacker had left behind. Joel sat beside me, occasionally asking questions, mostly staying out of the way while I worked. What I found made my blood run cold. The breach hadn't come from a weak password or a phishing attack. It had come through a legitimate access point, using valid API credentials from an IP address that the system had been configured to trust. An IP address that, according to the logs, belonged to me. "This doesn't make any sense," I said, staring at the screen. "These logs show the breach originated from my home network, but I didn't access their systems that day. I have my own logs that prove I was working on a completely different client project." Joel leaned over my shoulder, studying the screen. "Could someone have spoofed your IP?" "That's what I thought at first, but look, they used my actual API keys that are stored encrypted on my local machine. Someone would need physical access to my computer to get them." Derek and Sandra exchanged glances. I could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the technical brilliance they'd trusted versus the evidence in front of them. "Marcus," Derek said carefully, "is there any possibility that your system was compromised, that someone gained access to your credentials without your knowledge?" "That's the only explanation that makes sense," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Someone targeted my system specifically to use them as a vector for attacking your infrastructure." "Or," Sandra said quietly, "you accessed our systems and are now trying to cover your tracks." The words hung in the air like poison gas. "I would never," I said, my voice coming out strangled. "You know me. You know my work. I've spent my entire career protecting people's data. Why would I suddenly start stealing it?" "Financial motivation," Derek suggested, though his tone made it clear he didn't want to believe it. "Pressure from building a business. We've seen good people make bad choices before." Joel's hand landed on my shoulder. "Marcus didn't do this," he said firmly. "I've known him for almost a decade. He's the most ethical security professional I've ever worked with. If his credentials were used, then someone compromised his systems. We need to figure out how that happened." I felt a rush of gratitude toward Joel in that moment. He was defending me, standing by me, using his credibility to shore up mine. That's what friends do. So why did his hand on my shoulder feel like a brand? "We're going to need to bring in an independent forensic team," Derek said. "Presidio has a responsibility to our customers to understand exactly what happened and how. Marcus, I hope you understand that we need to treat this as a formal investigation." "I understand," I said, though everything in me wanted to scream that I was innocent, that I'd been set up, that something was terribly wrong. Joel and I left Presidio's offices in silence. The drive back to our office felt like moving through quicksand, everything slow and heavy and wrong. "Someone is fucking with you," Joel said finally. "Someone with serious technical skills and access to your systems. We need to figure out who." "Who has that kind of access?" I asked, though I was really asking myself. Who knows enough about my work to pull this off? Disgruntled former client? Someone you beat out for a contract? Competitor trying to destroy our reputation? Joel rattled off possibilities like he'd been thinking about this. Or maybe someone closer. A friend, a colleague, someone who's been in your apartment or had access to your computer. The suggestion was logical, practical, exactly what a good business partner would propose. But it also planted a seed of paranoia that would grow into something monstrous. That night, I sat in my apartment and tore apart my entire digital life looking for evidence of compromise. I rebuilt my home network from scratch, changed every password, rotated every API key, implemented new monitoring that would alert me to any unusual access patterns. I documented everything meticulously, building a comprehensive report that showed my system had been targeted and exploited by someone with sophisticated knowledge of security infrastructure. The evidence was thin. Whoever had done this was good enough not to leave obvious traces, but it existed. System logs that showed anomalous access patterns, network traffic that suggested credential theft, timestamps that didn't quite align with my actual usage. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in a state of suspended dread, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The independent forensic team that Presidio hired was one of the best in the industry, a firm called Cybersecurity that specialized in incident response and digital forensics. I knew their work. I'd cited their research in my own security audits. If anyone could find evidence that I'd been compromised rather than being the attacker, it would be them. Joel continued to be supportive throughout the investigation. He handled all communication with Presidio, keeping me insulated from the worst of their suspicion. He helped me refine my documentation, suggesting additional evidence I could gather to prove my innocence. He even offered to pay for a lawyer out of his own pocket if it came to that. "We're in this together," he told me. "Your problem is my problem. That's what partnership means." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. The meeting where Cybertrace presented their findings took place on a grey November morning that felt appropriate for the destruction of my life. Joel and I sat across from Presidio's executive team while the lead forensic investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, walked through her team's analysis. "We've conducted a comprehensive investigation of the breach at Presidio Capital," Sarah began, pulling up slides on the conference room screen. "What we found raises significant concerns about the origin of the attack." My hands were clenched so tight in my lap that my fingernails left marks on my palms. Sarah continued, detailing findings that got progressively worse. The breach hadn't been a one-time occurrence. Presidio's systems had been accessed repeatedly over a 6-month period, always using my credentials, always extracting specific high-value data sets. The access patterns suggested someone with intimate knowledge of their security architecture, exactly the knowledge I would have had from conducting their security audit. The attacker demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Presidio's infrastructure, Sarah said. They knew which databases contained the most valuable information, which security measures could be bypassed, and which access patterns would blend in with legitimate administrative activity. This level of knowledge suggests insider involvement. "Marcus conducted our security audit," Derek said quietly. "He had access to all of that information. Which is why we expanded our investigation to examine Mr. Chen's systems and activities," Sarah said. She clicked to the next slide, and my stomach dropped. The slide showed financial transactions, large cryptocurrency deposits, payments from anonymous sources, all allegedly linked to accounts with my personal information. "We've identified concerning patterns in financial activity associated with Mr. Chen," Sarah continued. "Large cash deposits that don't correlate with documented business income. Cryptocurrency transactions suggesting liquidation of digital assets. Payment patterns that align with the timeline of data exfiltration from Presidio's systems." "I don't have any cryptocurrency accounts," I said, my voice tight. "I've never traded crypto in my life. Someone is using my identity." Sarah's expression was professionally sympathetic, but skeptical. "Mr. Chen, these accounts were opened using your social security number, date of birth, and previous addresses. They've been active for approximately 18 months. 18 months. The same period when Joel's lifestyle had started to inflate, when he'd bought the Tesla, moved to the expensive apartment, started wearing designer suits. I looked at Joel. He was staring at the screen with an expression of shock and concern that looked completely genuine. His hand found my shoulder again, that gesture of support and solidarity that was becoming increasingly oppressive. "This is identity theft," Joel said firmly. "Someone has been using Marcus's information to open fraudulent accounts. That's what we're looking at here. A sophisticated frame job." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's one possibility. The other possibility is that Mr. Chen has been operating these accounts himself and is now claiming they're fraudulent to avoid accountability." "Based on what evidence?" Joel demanded. "You're making serious accusations without proof." "The evidence is the pattern," Sarah said. "The knowledge required to execute these breaches, the access credentials used, the financial activity correlated with the timeline of attacks. Individually, each piece might be explainable. Together, they paint a clear picture. A picture that someone created specifically to frame Marcus," Joel insisted. His defense of me was passionate, articulate, convincing. If I hadn't been starting to suspect him, I would have been grateful for his advocacy. Instead, I was watching him perform and seeing the cracks in his act. The meeting ended badly. Presidio terminated our contract effective immediately. Derek apologized to both of us, but mostly to Joel, as if I was already a lost cause and Joel was the one who deserved sympathy for being associated with me. "We're obligated to report these findings to law enforcement," Derek said. "We have a responsibility to our customers." I nodded numbly, past the point of arguing. Joel and I left the building together. The afternoon was cold and grey, matching my internal state. Joel was talking, saying something about fighting back, about proving my innocence, about not giving up. But his words sounded distant, like they were coming from underwater. Because I was starting to see it. The pattern, the pieces, clicking into place in a way that made terrible, perfect sense. Joel had access to everything, our shared office, our client files, our business systems. He'd been in my apartment dozens of times. He knew my work patterns, my methodologies, my security architectures better than anyone except me. He had motive. The luxury lifestyle he was living required money we weren't making legitimately. He had means, the technical knowledge to translate my work into exploitable vulnerabilities, even if he couldn't have executed the sophisticated attacks himself. And he had opportunity, the 18 months of increasing distance between us, the odd hours, the unexplained phone calls, the evasiveness about his finances. "Marcus?" Joel's voice cut through my spiral. "You with me?" I focused on his face. Concerned, supportive. The perfect friend in the perfect crisis. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just processing." "We'll figure this out," Joel said. "I promise. Whoever is doing this to you will expose them." And I thought, what if it's you? But I didn't say it. Not yet. Because if Joel was behind this, if my best friend had spent 18 months systematically destroying my life, I needed proof. Accusations wouldn't be enough. Suspicion wouldn't save me. I needed evidence that would survive scrutiny. Evidence that would bury him as thoroughly as he was trying to bury me. So I smiled weakly and nodded and let Joel drive me back to the office, all while my mind raced through possibilities for how to investigate the person I'd trusted most in the world. That night marked the beginning of my descent into obsession. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the growing certainty that Joel Hendricks was destroying me while wearing the mask of friendship. I started with what I could access legally: public records, financial documents, social media analysis. Joel's grandfather's estate had settled in 2018, and the settlement had been modest, maybe $50,000 after taxes and legal fees, certainly nothing that would fund a Tesla, a luxury apartment, and a designer wardrobe. So where was the money coming from? I spent hours researching dark web marketplaces, learning how vulnerabilities were bought and sold, understanding the cryptocurrency transactions that made it all possible. I'd spent my career protecting systems from these criminal networks, but I'd never really studied their economics, their structures, their methods of operation. What I learned made me sick. Corporate security vulnerabilities were big business on the dark web. A well-documented exploit for a financial services company could sell for $50,000 or more, depending on the value of the data at risk. Healthcare records, like the ones we protected for Medisecure and similar clients, were even more valuable because of their combination of personal and financial information. If someone had been systematically selling vulnerabilities for our clients over the past 18 months, they could have easily generated several $100,000, more than enough to explain Joel's lifestyle inflation. I created a fake identity on the dark web forums where these transactions occurred. It took me weeks to build credibility, to participate in discussions without revealing my inexperience with criminal networks. Every interaction made me feel dirty, like I was betraying the ethical foundations I'd built my career on. But I needed to understand. I needed to see what was being sold and how. The seller went by the handle Architect Zero. They specialized in high-value corporate system vulnerabilities, always with detailed technical documentation that allowed buyers to exploit gaps before companies could patch them. Their reputation on the forums was excellent. They delivered reliable information, never sold the same vulnerability twice, and provided enough technical detail that even moderately skilled attackers could execute successful breaches. I studied every post Architect Zero had made over the past 2 years. The vulnerabilities they sold matched the security audits I'd conducted for our clients with disturbing precision. Not direct copies, that would be too obvious, but translations of my work into dark web vernacular. More importantly, I started noticing errors in Architect Zero's descriptions, small technical mistakes that someone with deep security expertise wouldn't have made, but that someone translating my reports without fully understanding them might have missed. Things that Joel, with his surface-level technical knowledge, would have gotten wrong. I documented everything in encrypted files, stored on systems Joel had no access to, every correlation, every timeline match, every suspicious financial pattern. I was building a case against my best friend, and the evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough, not yet. What I needed was proof that would survive legal scrutiny, something that directly connected Joel to Architect Zero, to the cryptocurrency accounts, to the actual breaches. Suspicion and correlation wouldn't be enough to clear my name or destroy his. The FBI showed up at our office on a Wednesday morning in late November. I was there alone. Joel had texted saying he had a breakfast meeting with a potential client when 2 agents in cheap suits and serious expressions walked through our door with enough legal documentation to bury me. "Marcus Chen, we have a warrant to seize your electronic devices as part of an ongoing investigation into computer fraud and identity theft." I stood there, numb, as they methodically packed up my work computer, my backup drives, my phone. They were professional, almost sympathetic. The lead agent, a man in his 40s who introduced himself as Special Agent Williams, explained that I wasn't under arrest, that this was just part of their investigation, that I had the right to legal representation. "Someone is framing me," I told him, knowing how desperate it sounded but unable to stop myself. "Someone with access to my systems and my client information. I'm a victim here." Agent Williams nodded with the practiced patience of someone who'd heard every variation of "I didn't do it." that existed. We'll be thorough in our investigation, Mr. Chen. If you're innocent, the evidence will show that. But I knew the evidence wouldn't show that. Someone, Joel, I was now certain, had made sure the evidence pointed directly at me. Someone who knew exactly how to construct a digital trail that would survive forensic scrutiny. After the FBI left, I sat in our empty office and called Joel using the landline phone, since the agents had seized my mobile. They seized everything, I told him when he answered. My computers, my files, my phone. I'm using the office phone because I don't have any other way to communicate. Jesus, Marcus. His voice was tight with concern. Did they arrest you? Not yet, but it's coming. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Joel, I need you to be straight with me about something. Silence on the other end. Then cautiously, what? Is there any possibility that someone could have accessed my systems through our shared business network? Any vulnerability in our office setup that I might have missed? More silence. I could almost hear him thinking, calculating his response. Marcus, you built our network. If there was a vulnerability, you'd know about it. That's not an answer to my question. What exactly are you asking me? His tone had shifted, taken on an edge I'd rarely heard before. I'm asking if there's any technical explanation for how someone could have compromised my credentials without me detecting it. You're in our office as much as I am. You have physical access to the same systems. I need to know if... Stop! Joel's voice went cold. We're done with this conversation. Joel! Are you seriously asking if I had something to do with this? After everything we've been through together, after I've stood by you, defended you, supported you through this nightmare? I'm not accusing you, I said, though we both knew I was. I'm trying to understand. No, you're trying to make me the villain in your story because you can't accept that. Maybe you fucked up. Maybe you got sloppy with your security. Maybe all those years of being the smartest guy in the room made you arrogant and careless. The attack was so sudden, so vicious, that I was momentarily speechless. This wasn't the Joel I knew, supportive, measured, diplomatic. This was something else, something that had been hidden beneath the surface. I've been defending you to clients, Joel continued, his voice tight with anger. I've been using my reputation to shore up yours. I've been standing between you and complete professional destruction, and now you're accusing me? I'm not. I'm going to help you through this because that's what friends do, Joel interrupted. But I need you to stop with the paranoid accusations and focus on building an actual defense. Get a lawyer, talk to the FBI, figure out how to prove your innocence without trying to drag me down with you. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there, holding the office phone, my hand shaking slightly, and realized that I'd just made a critical tactical error. If Joel was involved, and every instinct I had was now screaming that he was, I'd just show my hand. I'd let him know I suspected him. And Joel was smart enough, strategic enough, to use that knowledge against me. The next month was a systematic descent into hell. 2 more clients reported breaches with the same signature pattern: my credentials, my access, my technical knowledge. The FBI investigation expanded. I hired a lawyer I couldn't afford with money I didn't have, a sharp woman named Rachel Weinstein, who took my case despite my inability to pay her full rate because she said something about my situation bothered her. The evidence against you is almost too perfect, she explained during our first meeting. Real criminals make mistakes. They leave gaps in their stories. What I'm seeing here is a digital trail that's been constructed with extraordinary care. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make you look guilty. My business partner, I said. Joel Hendricks. He has access to everything. My systems, my work, my clients. and he's been living way beyond our business income for the past year and a half. Rachel made notes. Do you have evidence connecting him to the breaches or the cryptocurrency accounts? Circumstantial evidence, timeline correlations, financial patterns, but nothing definitive. Then we need to find something definitive, because circumstantial evidence works both ways, and right now it's pointing at you more than him. I also had to tell my mother what was happening. She called one evening, confused and frightened by news reports she'd seen about cybercrimes being investigated in the Bay Area, asking if I knew anything about it. "Mama," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to tell you something." The conversation that followed was one of the worst of my life. Explaining to the woman who'd sacrificed everything for me that I was a suspect in federal crimes I didn't commit. Hearing the uncertainty in her voice when she said she believed me. Knowing that even my own mother wasn't completely sure. "Baby, did you do something wrong?" she asked finally. "No, Mama, someone is setting me up, someone I trusted." "Who would do that to you?" "Joel." His name tasted like poison. "My business partner, my best friend. That nice boy who came to your graduation, who helped you start your company. He's not who we thought he was." My mother was quiet for a long moment. "Then what? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to prove it," I said. "I'm going to prove he did this, and I'm going to make sure he pays for it." Be careful, Marcus. Revenge can poison you worse than the original hurt. "This isn't revenge, Mama. This is survival." But even as I said it, I knew it was both. Throughout all of this, Joel maintained the appearance of support. He came to meetings with Rachel, helped me document my whereabouts during key breach windows, provided character references that emphasized my ethical commitment to protecting client data. To anyone watching, he was the perfect friend standing by someone accused of terrible crimes. But I was watching more carefully now, and I was seeing things I'd missed before. Joel had stopped making eye contact when we talked about technical details of the breaches. He'd developed a habit of checking his phone compulsively during strategy sessions with Rachel, like he was monitoring something that couldn't wait. He'd subtly discouraged Rachel from pursuing certain investigative directions. "That's probably a waste of resources," or "we should focus on building Marcus's defense, not chasing conspiracy theories." And most damning, Joel had started pressuring me to dissolve our business partnership. "We need to think practically, Marcus," he said one evening in late November. We were in our office, now mostly my office, since Joel had started working from home more often. "Even if you're cleared of all charges, our reputation is destroyed. Clients aren't going to trust Chen Hendricks' security anymore. We need to shut it down cleanly before the debt gets worse." "And then what?" I asked. I've been approached by a few firms about consulting opportunities, big firms that can absorb the reputation hit from my association with this situation. I could probably land something decent if I distance myself from the business now, while I still have some credibility left. "You want to abandon the business we built together because I'm being framed for crimes I didn't commit?" Joel's jaw tightened. "I want to salvage what I can from a terrible situation. I have bills to pay, Marcus, a life to maintain. I can't keep carrying this business while you fight criminal charges that might take years to resolve." "You seem to be paying your bills just fine," I said quietly. "New car, luxury apartment, designer clothes, expensive dinners. Where's all that money coming from, Joel?" His eyes went flat. "Dangerous." "We've had this conversation. I'm not having it again." "Family money," I pressed. "Inheritance that settled 3 years after your grandfather died. Good deals on leases in buildings your family friends supposedly owned. Consulting work you've never once mentioned specifically. It's all very convenient and very vague." "Be careful, Marcus," Joel said softly. Or what? Or you'll what, Joel? He stood up, gathering his laptop and jacket with deliberate, controlled movements. Or you're going to alienate the only person who's still standing by you. I'm trying to help you. I'm using my reputation to defend you. I'm spending my time and energy supporting you through this nightmare. Don't make me regret that. Maybe you should regret it, I said. Maybe you should stop pretending to be my friend and just admit what you're really doing. Joel stopped at the door, his back to me. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he turned, and the expression on his face was something I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost pitying. You're spiraling, he said quietly. You're so desperate to make sense of this that you're creating conspiracy theories and casting me as the villain. It's sad, Marcus. And it's exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that makes the FBI think you're guilty. He left without another word. I sat alone in our office as the sun set over San Francisco, and I understood with perfect clarity that Joel Hendricks was destroying me. More than that, he was enjoying it. The performance, the manipulation, the careful construction of my professional suicide. This was entertainment for him. And I was going to stop him. The question was how. I spent December in a state of focused obsession that probably looked like madness from the outside. I documented everything, every interaction with Joel, every discrepancy in his story, every timeline inconsistency. I couldn't access his systems directly without committing the crimes I was accused of, but I could watch his patterns. I could track his digital footprints. I became an expert in cryptocurrency transactions, learning how to trace digital money through the various exchanges and wallets that criminals used to hide their activity. I studied social engineering techniques, understanding how Joel might have manipulated not just me, but our clients, our colleagues, everyone in his orbit. And I planned. Joel invited me to a New Year's Eve party at his apartment. "We should try to end this terrible year on a positive note, man," he said. "Fresh start, new year, all that bullshit. Come have some drinks, try to relax for one night." I accepted because it gave me the opportunity I needed. I'd ordered a small network monitoring device online, nothing illegal by itself, just a tool that security professionals use for legitimate traffic analysis. But deployed covertly in someone's home network, without their knowledge, it crossed into questionable legal territory. I rationalized it by telling myself that I was already facing federal charges. What was one more potential crime when I was fighting for my life? The party was everything I'd expected. Expensive champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. Beautiful people in designer clothes. The kind of casual luxury that Joel had somehow made his normal life despite our business supposedly struggling. I nursed a beer and made small talk, waiting for my opportunity. It came around 11:30 when Joel was in the kitchen mixing cocktails for a group of guests who were laughing too loud at jokes that weren't that funny. I excused myself to use the bathroom, walked past it, and slipped into the small office area where Joel kept his home network equipment. My hands were shaking as I attached the monitoring device to his router. It was tiny, designed to look like a standard network component if anyone happened to inspect it closely. It would log his internet activity, connection, times, data volumes, destination IP addresses, without capturing actual packet content. Metadata only, which made it slightly less illegal than full interception. I had just finished securing it when I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Marcus, are you okay, man?" Joel's voice, getting closer. I stepped out of the office just as he rounded the corner, forcing my expression into something that resembled casual confusion. "Yeah, sorry. Was looking for your bathroom and got turned around. This place is bigger than I thought." He studied me for a moment. and I forced myself to meet his eyes, to act normal, to be the friend he thought he was manipulating so effectively. "Other direction," he said finally, gesturing back toward the living area. "You look stressed. You should try to have some fun tonight. New year, fresh start, all that bullshit." Hard to feel fresh when I'm facing federal charges. "The charges will get dropped," Joel said with such easy confidence that I wanted to scream. "Once the FBI finishes their investigation and realizes the evidence doesn't actually prove anything concrete, you just need to be patient. Trust the system." "You sound very certain about that." "I have faith in justice. And in you." His hand landed on my shoulder again, that gesture that had once meant solidarity, but now felt like mockery wrapped in false friendship. "Come on, let's get drunk and forget about this nightmare for a few hours." I let him lead me back to the party. I made conversation with people whose names I immediately forgot. I watched the countdown to midnight. I accepted hugs and well wishes from strangers who had no idea that the man standing next to them was being systematically destroyed by the host of this party. And the whole time, my monitoring device was quietly logging every packet that passed through Joel's network. Over the next 6 weeks, I watched the data accumulate with an obsessiveness that consumed every other aspect of my life. I stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night. I lost weight because I kept forgetting to eat. Rachel called me multiple times to ask if I was okay, and I lied each time because I couldn't explain what I was doing without admitting to illegal surveillance. Joel's internet usage was extensive and sophisticated, multiple encrypted connections throughout each day, VPN usage that routed his traffic through servers in countries with strong privacy laws, Tor connections that suggested dark web access. He was being careful, covering his tracks in ways that demonstrated he knew exactly what he was doing. But nobody's perfect. And Joel's overconfidence, that easy certainty that he was smarter than everyone else, was starting to show in his patterns. I noticed that despite all his security precautions, his encrypted connections followed a predictable schedule. Certain times of day, certain connection durations, certain data volume patterns. And those patterns correlated almost perfectly with Architect Zero's posting schedule on the dark web forums. It still wasn't proof. A defense attorney could argue that correlation wasn't causation, that plenty of people used encrypted connections at similar times. But it was another thread in the web I was weaving around him. Then, in late January, something happened that changed everything. One of our former clients, a financial services company called Sterling Trust, reported a massive breach. Their entire customer database had been accessed and exfiltrated. The forensic evidence pointed to my credentials again, following the same pattern that had destroyed my reputation with every previous breach. But there was something different this time. The breach had occurred on a specific date and time when I could prove, absolutely and definitively, that I was elsewhere. Not just through my own logs or my own testimony, but through independent, verifiable evidence. I'd been in Sacramento visiting my mother. I had credit card receipts from gas stations on I-80. I had security camera footage from the nursing home where she worked, showing me helping her with paperwork in the administrative office. I even had a traffic camera image showing my car on the highway at the exact time the Sterling Trust breach was occurring. It was the first crack in the perfect frame job Joel had constructed. I took this evidence to Rachel immediately, walking into her office without an appointment because I couldn't wait. "This is it," I told her, spreading documentation across her desk. Concrete proof that I couldn't have been the one accessing Sterling Trust systems. I was 2 hours away with an ironclad alibi. Rachel studied the evidence with the careful attention she brought to everything, making notes, cross-referencing timestamps, building the case in her mind. "It helps," she agreed finally. "But the prosecution will argue that you could have automated the attack, set it up to run while you were away, covered your tracks. Then we
Make them prove that. We force them to explain exactly how I supposedly committed this breach when I have multiple independent sources confirming I was in Sacramento. We challenge their entire theory of the case." Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Now you're thinking like a lawyer. This is good, Marcus. This is the first real leverage we've had." We presented the Sterling Trust alibi to the FBI. Agent Williams and his team reviewed my evidence, confirmed my whereabouts through their own investigation, and I watched their certainty start to crack. "If you weren't the one who accessed Sterling Trust's systems," Williams said slowly, "then either you have sophisticated automation capabilities we haven't identified, or someone else is using your credentials in a very deliberate manner." "That's what I've been telling you for months," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Someone is framing me. Someone with access to my systems and my
work. Or," Williams continued, his eyes sharp, "you have an accomplice, someone who had access to your credentials and systems, who could have executed these breaches on your behalf while you established alibis." My stomach dropped. "You think I'm working with someone?" "I think we need to expand our investigation to include everyone who had access to your work. Business partners, employees, associates." He paused meaningfully. "Joel Hendricks, for example." I should have felt vindicated. Finally, someone with authority was considering the possibility I'd been screaming about for months, but all I felt was cold dread that this would tip Joel off, that he'd destroy evidence or disappear or find some new way to bury me. "If you're going to investigate Joel," I said carefully, "you need to understand that he's extremely sophisticated. He's had months to cover his tracks, and he's smart enough to have anticipated this possibility." Williams gave me a sharp look. "Are you suggesting our
investigation won't be thorough enough?" "I'm suggesting that Joel Hendricks is more dangerous than he appears. He's been playing a role for years, the charming business partner, the loyal friend. Don't let that performance blind you to what he's actually capable of." That night, I made a decision that would either save me or destroy me completely. I was going to build a trap specifically designed for Joel. A honeypot that would be too tempting for him to resist, too perfectly aligned with his methods and patterns to ignore. And I was going to document everything with enough detail that even the FBI couldn't ignore the evidence. I created a fake client. It took weeks of meticulous work. I built a complete digital fiction, a mid-sized pharmaceutical company called Meridian Biosystems, supposedly based in San Diego. I created a professional website with realistic content about drug development and clinical trials. I established LinkedIn profiles for fictional employees with detailed
work histories. I set up a virtual office phone number that I could monitor. I even created email accounts and had them exchange messages to establish a digital paper trail. The entire fake company existed in a controlled environment I'd built specifically for this purpose. Everything was logged, monitored, documented. Every access would be traced, every connection recorded. Then I'd let Joel discover this potential client through his own business development channels. I made it look like Meridian had found our company through an industry referral, like they were specifically interested in working with someone who had deep healthcare security experience. I knew Joel wouldn't be able to resist. Healthcare data was among the most valuable on dark web markets. A pharmaceutical company would have not just patient data, but proprietary research information, clinical trial results, drug formulations. The potential payday would be enormous. Joel took the bait immediately. "Marcus, I just got An inquiry from a pharmaceutical company in San Diego, he told me during one of our increasingly rare office meetings. His voice had that excited energy he got when he smelled money. They're looking for comprehensive security auditing. This could be exactly what we need to start rebuilding our reputation. We still have a company? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I thought you wanted to dissolve the partnership. I've been reconsidering, Joel said smoothly, shifting gears without missing a beat. If we can land a few new clients, show that the market still has confidence in our work, it might help with your legal situation. The FBI sees that clients trust you, it undermines their narrative that you're a criminal. It was perfectly logical, perfectly supportive, perfectly designed to give him access to whatever vulnerabilities existed in Meridian Biosystems' fictional infrastructure. What's the scope of work? I asked. Comprehensive security audit, penetration testing, vulnerability assessment. Pretty standard. They're willing to pay premium rates because they need it done quickly. Apparently they've got some FDA submission deadlines coming up, and they want to make sure their systems are bulletproof before the review process. I'll put together a proposal. Over the next 2 weeks, I built the most sophisticated trap I'd ever designed. Meridian Biosystems' network existed entirely in a sandboxed environment, but it looked real. Realistic architecture with the kind of security gaps that would exist in a company that had grown quickly without proper infrastructure investment. Realistic vulnerabilities that followed patterns I'd documented in previous audits. Realistic security measures that looked adequate to non-experts but had exploitable weaknesses. I made sure the vulnerabilities I built into the system were ones that Joel would recognize from my previous work. Specific implementation patterns, specific authentication, weaknesses, specific database configurations, things that would look familiar to someone who'd been translating my audit reports into dark web merchandise for the past 2 years. And I made sure every single access, every connection, every interaction with the Meridian systems was logged with forensic-level detail. Joel handled the client relationship as always. He conducted video meetings with Meridian's executives, played by a security consultant friend who owed me a favor and knew better than to ask too many questions about what was really going on. He negotiated contract terms, discussed timelines, and ultimately gave me the access credentials I would need to conduct the comprehensive audit. I performed the audit exactly as I would for any real client. I spent long hours mapping their network topology, testing their security controls, documenting their vulnerabilities. I produced a comprehensive report that detailed exactly how Meridian systems could be exploited, authentication bypasses, unencrypted database connections, API endpoints that didn't properly validate input, backup systems with inadequate access controls. It was a roadmap for how to steal everything of value from a pharmaceutical company's systems. And I put it directly into Joel's hands. Meridian has some serious gaps in their security infrastructure, I told Joel, walking him through the findings in our office. Their authentication systems are vulnerable to credential harvesting through a session token weakness. Their primary database has implementation flaws in the encryption. It's encrypting data at rest, but the keys are stored in a configuration file that's accessible through a directory traversal exploit. Their API endpoints don't properly validate input, which creates SQL injection vectors. Joel nodded, taking notes with the focused attention he always brought to technical briefings he needed to translate for clients. How critical are these vulnerabilities? Very. Any one of them could lead to a complete compromise of their systems. Combined, they're a disaster waiting to happen. How quickly can they remediate? I've given them a prioritized plan. The authentication and database issues need to be addressed immediately, within the next 2 weeks. The API problems can wait slightly longer but should be fixed within a month. After that, there are medium priority items that should be addressed in the next quarter. And if they don't patch quickly enough? Joel asked, his pen hovering over his notes. Then they're exposed until they do. That's why I emphasized the urgency in the report. These aren't theoretical vulnerabilities. They're actively exploitable by anyone with moderate technical skills and knowledge of the architecture. Joel smiled. You're always so thorough, Marcus. That attention to detail is why we make such a good team. I watched him leave the office that day, carrying my report, and felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait and see if he'd spring it. 3 days later, I was monitoring the Architect Zero account on the dark web forum when a new post appeared. New listing, pharmaceutical company database access, complete architecture documentation included. Multiple exploitation vectors available, high-value target with proprietary research data and clinical trial information. Authentication bypass, database encryption flaw, API injection points, premium price for premium access, DM for details. The post included technical details that matched precisely, and I mean precisely, down to specific configuration parameters, the vulnerabilities I documented in my Meridian report. I sat in my apartment, staring at my screen, and felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was just a cold, hollow certainty that I'd been right about everything. My best friend had spent 2 years destroying my life for money. And now I had proof. I documented everything. Screenshots of the Architect Zero post with timestamps, logs from the Meridian honeypot showing access attempts using the credentials I'd provided to Joel, connection metadata showing encrypted traffic from Joel's home network at the exact times when the Architect Zero post had been created and updated, financial analysis showing the correlation between Architect Zero's sales and Joel's lifestyle inflation. I compiled it all into a comprehensive report that laid out the case against Joel with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd brought to every security audit I'd ever conducted. Timeline correlations, technical analysis, financial patterns, behavioral observations, everything. Then I took it to Rachel. She reviewed the evidence for 3 hours, making notes, occasionally looking up at me with expressions that ranged from impressed to horrified to something that might have been pity. Marcus, she finally said, setting down the last page. This is extraordinary work. It's also potentially inadmissible in court because of how you obtained some of it. The monitoring device in his router, I said flatly. That and the fact that you created a fictitious client specifically to entrap him. A defense attorney could argue that you manufactured evidence, that you induced him to commit a crime he wouldn't have otherwise committed. It's complicated. He was already committing these crimes, I said, my voice rising, despite my effort to stay calm. I didn't make him do anything he hadn't been doing for 2 years. I just gave him another opportunity to do what he was already doing. I know, and we might be able to make that argument successfully. But it's going to be a fight. She paused, studying my face. There's another option. What? We give all of this to the FBI, everything. We tell them exactly what you did and why you did it. We let them build their own case against Joel using legal investigative methods. Your evidence becomes the roadmap that points them in the right direction, not the foundation of the prosecution. And if they can't find enough legally obtained evidence, then we're back to fighting your charges with what we have, which is significantly stronger now that we have the Sterling Trust alibi and can point to Joel as an alternative suspect. She leaned forward. But Marcus, if even a quarter of what you've documented here holds up to official FBI scrutiny, they will bury Joel. This isn't just computer fraud anymore. This is systematic criminal enterprise, conspiracy, identity theft, wire fraud, probably RICO charges. Joel's looking at decades in federal prison. I thought about Joel's hand on my shoulder in that Presidio conference room, his voice telling me he believed in me, his perfect performance as the loyal friend while he systematically destroyed everything I'd built. "Give them everything," I said. Agent Williams called me 2 days later and asked me to come to the FBI field office in San Francisco. I went with Rachel, expecting another interrogation, another attempt to break down my story and extract a confession. Instead, Williams greeted us with something that looked almost like respect. "Mr. Chen, we need to discuss your investigation into Joel Hendricks." I'd prepared myself for this conversation, rehearsed responses with Rachel, but my heart still kicked into overdrive. "I don't know what you mean." "We executed a warrant on Joel Hendricks' apartment and office yesterday," Williams said, pulling out a file. "We found the network monitoring device you installed in his home router. We also found evidence that you created a fictitious client company called Meridian Biosystems for the purpose of documenting his criminal activity." I looked at Rachel. She squeezed my arm in warning but didn't speak. Williams continued, "Normally, that kind of vigilante investigation would create significant problems for our case and potentially expose you to additional criminal liability. However, in this circumstance, it gave us probable cause to expand our investigation in directions we hadn't previously considered." "Meaning?" Rachel asked. "Meaning we've been building a case against Joel Hendricks for the past 6 weeks based on the information Marcus provided. The Sterling Trust alibi started us looking at alternative suspects. Marcus's documentation of Joel's financial patterns gave us justification to subpoena banking and cryptocurrency records. And what we found," Williams paused, something that might have been satisfaction crossing his face. "Mr. Chen, you were right about everything." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "What did you find?" "Joel Hendricks has been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise selling corporate security vulnerabilities for approximately 27 months. He used his access to your work product to identify exploitable weaknesses in your shared client systems. He sold that information on dark web marketplaces using the handle Architect0. When he needed to cover his tracks, he systematically framed you by using your credentials and access methods to make it appear you were the source of the breaches." "The cryptocurrency accounts?" I asked. "We traced them. Joel was using a complex network of exchanges and wallets to hide the money trail, but he made mistakes. Small mistakes, but enough. We found transactions linking his verified identity to accounts that received payments from the same buyers who purchased vulnerabilities from Architect0. The breaches, all of them? All of them were Joel. He was careful, sophisticated, and very nearly successful in making you the perfect scapegoat. If you hadn't built that honeypot operation with Meridian Biosystems, if you hadn't documented his patterns so meticulously, we might never have had enough evidence to pursue him." I felt something crack open inside my chest. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or just the release of carrying impossible weight for too long. "What happens now?" Rachel asked. Williams pulled out additional documentation. "Now we need Marcus's cooperation. Joel Hendricks will be arrested this afternoon. We'd like Mr. Chen to testify before a grand jury about your business relationship, Joel's access to your systems, and the technical details of how he exploited your clients. Your cooperation will also factor significantly into resolving the charges against you." "The charges will be dropped?" Rachel pressed. "Dropped and sealed. Mr. Chen will have no criminal record from this investigation. We're also prepared to issue a formal public statement clearing his name and acknowledging that he was a victim in this case, not a perpetrator. We'll be coordinating with your former clients to explain what actually happened and make clear that Marcus's work was compromised by his business partner, not by any negligence or malfeasance on his part. Rachel was nodding, making notes, probably already thinking about next steps, but I was stuck on one thing. "When will you arrest him?" I asked. Williams checked his watch. "In approximately 2 hours. We wanted to make sure you were safe and informed before we moved. Is there anything else you need from us?" I thought about Joel's Russian Hill apartment, his luxury lifestyle built on my destroyed reputation. I thought about every lie, every manipulation, every moment when he'd stood beside me while systematically destroying my life. "I want to be there when you arrest him," I said. Rachel started to object, but I cut her off. "I need to see it. I need him to know that I figured it out, that I beat him." Williams considered this for a long moment. "That's highly irregular. But given your cooperation and what you've been through, I can arrange for you to be present as an observer. You'll have to stay back. Let us handle the actual arrest. But you can be there." 2 hours later, I stood across the street from Joel's apartment building and watched a team of FBI agents approach the entrance. Williams had positioned me where I'd have a clear view, without interfering with the operation. Rachel stood beside me, her hand on my arm like she thought I might do something stupid or self-destructive. I watched the agents enter the building through the glass lobby doors. Williams had shown me the building's security camera feeds on his tablet, so I could see them approach Joel's floor, walk down the carpeted hallway to his door, and knock with official authority. Joel opened the door in expensive loungewear, designer sweatpants, and a cashmere hoodie that probably cost what I spent on rent each month. He looked confused at first, then concerned in that perfectly calibrated way he'd mastered. He said something I couldn't hear, probably offering to help, playing the cooperative citizen who had nothing to hide. I saw the moment when they showed him the warrant, saw his expression shift from confusion to understanding as they explained why they were there. Saw him try to maintain his composure, that social armor he'd worn for so long, as they read him his rights and placed handcuffs on his wrists. And then, as they began to lead him out of his apartment, Joel looked out the window. Our eyes met across the street. Even from that distance, I could see the recognition dawn in his face. He understood. He realized that I'd figured it out, that I'd beaten him, that all his careful planning and manipulation had failed. For just a moment his mask dropped completely. The concern, the friendship, the carefully maintained performance, all of it fell away, and I saw what had been underneath the whole time. Not regret, not shame, not even fear. Contempt. Pure, absolute contempt for me, for my trust, my friendship, my belief in our partnership. I'd been so easy to manipulate, so eager to believe in our bond, so completely blind to what he'd been doing. And he despised me for it. Then the agents blocked my view as they led him away, and he was gone. Rachel drove me back to my apartment. We didn't talk much during the drive. What was there to say? I'd won. I'd exposed Joel, cleared my name, survived the systematic destruction he'd engineered. So why did I feel so hollow? The news broke that evening. Prominent cybersecurity consultant arrested in massive data breach scheme. The FBI's press release was carefully worded, explaining that I had been wrongly accused, that I had cooperated extensively with their investigation, that I had helped expose a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had victimized multiple companies and thousands of individuals. My phone, the new one I'd bought after the FBI seized my old one, started ringing immediately. Former clients calling to apologize, to explain their positions, to ask about re-establishing relationships, industry colleagues offering support, job opportunities, character references, journalists wanting interviews about the brilliant investigation I'd conducted to expose my business partner's crimes. I turned my phone off and sat in my apartment in the dark, listening to the city sounds filtering through my windows. Joel's trial took 14 months to wind through the federal court system. I testified for 3 full days, walking the jury through every technical detail of his scheme. I explained how he'd exploited his access to my work, how he'd translated security audit findings into dark web merchandise, how he'd systematically framed me for crimes he was committing. Joel sat at the defense table in an expensive suit his family's money had probably paid for, maintaining that same expression of wounded innocence he'd perfected over 2 years of betraying me. His lawyers argued that I'd manipulated him, that I was the criminal mastermind who'd used Joel as a fall guy, that my honeypot investigation proved I was sophisticated enough to have engineered everything myself. The jury didn't believe them. They deliberated for 6 hours and convicted Joel on all counts. 17 separate charges of wire fraud, computer fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison. I sat in the courtroom gallery when the verdict was read, and I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no sense of justice being served, just emptiness where my best friendship used to exist. Chen Hendricks Security Solutions didn't survive, of course. Even with my name cleared and my reputation restored, the business was too tainted by the scandal to continue. Our remaining clients had moved on to other security firms. Our office lease had expired during the FBI investigation. I dissolved the partnership, settled our remaining debts with money I'd saved, and walked away from everything Joel and I had built together. I took a job at a large cybersecurity firm in Seattle. Clean slate, fresh start, new city where I wasn't the subject of local news coverage. The salary was good, the work was meaningful, and nobody there knew me as that guy whose business partner framed him for cybercrimes. My mother was proud when I told her about the new job, about moving to Seattle, about starting over. The charges had been dropped, my name had been cleared, I'd exposed a criminal and helped the FBI protect other potential victims. She saw it as a victory, as vindication, as proof that truth and justice still mattered. I tried to see it that way too. 3 years after Joel's conviction, I received a letter from him. It came through his lawyer, carefully worded to avoid any admission of guilt that might jeopardize his appeals. But the message was clear enough. He wanted to explain, to tell me his side of the story, to make me understand why he'd done what he'd done. I read the letter once, standing in my Seattle apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. Joel wrote about pressure from his family to maintain a certain lifestyle, about gambling debts I'd never known existed. Apparently, he'd burned through his inheritance at casinos in the year after his grandfather died. About feeling overshadowed by my technical brilliance while he was relegated to being just the business guy. About how the first vulnerability sale had been almost accidental, how the money had been too good to stop, how framing me had been a matter of survival rather than malice. He wrote that he'd never wanted to destroy me, he just needed to protect himself. He wrote that if I could understand his position, his perspective, the impossible choices he'd faced, then maybe I could forgive him. I burned the letter in my kitchen sink and never responded. Because here's what I learned from Joel Hendricks in the years since his betrayal. And my revenge trust, once broken, doesn't heal. It leaves scar tissue that aches in the cold, that twinges when you think about letting someone new get close, that reminds you constantly of what betrayal costs. Friendship can be weaponized by people who see relationships as tools rather than bonds. Every confidence you share, every vulnerability you expose, every truth you reveal, all of it can be used against you by someone who values their own interests above your humanity. The person you think you know best might be the one wearing the most sophisticated mask. The friend who helps you through college might be cataloging your weaknesses. The partner who stands beside you might be planning your destruction. The hand on your shoulder might be measuring how deep the knife should go. And revenge, real revenge, the kind that puts someone in federal prison and destroys their entire life, doesn't feel the way you imagine it will when you're lying awake at night, obsessed with proving what they did to you. It doesn't feel like justice or satisfaction or vindication. It feels like standing in the ruins of what you built together and realizing that even in winning, you've lost something you can never get back. I don't regret exposing Joel. I don't regret the investigation or the testimony or any of the choices I made to prove my innocence and his guilt. The world is objectively safer with him in federal prison. The clients he victimized got some measure of justice. The precedent his case set helps protect against future instances of security consultant fraud. The FBI used my investigation techniques to improve their own cybercrime protocols. All of that matters. All of that was worth doing. But sometimes, late at night in my Seattle apartment, I think about that first day we met at Berkeley. Joel handing me a cup of terrible punch and suggesting we ditch the orientation mixer for actual food. The easy friendship that had formed from that simple moment, the brotherhood we'd built through late-night study sessions and shared struggles and mutual support through the challenges of college and early career. And I wonder if any of it was ever real, if Joel ever actually cared about our friendship, or if I was always just a
useful tool for him to exploit when the opportunity arose. I'll never know the answer to that question. Joel will spend the next decade and a half in federal prison, and by the time he gets out, we'll both be different people living different lives in different worlds. The friendship we had, real or performed, genuine or calculated, is as dead as if one of us had actually died. That's the thing about betrayal that nobody tells you until you've lived through it. The person who betrays you kills a version of yourself that trusted them. That version, naive and open and willing to believe in the fundamental goodness of someone you loved, doesn't come back, even after the revenge is complete. Even after justice is served, even after you've rebuilt your life and career and reputation. I'm successful now. I'm respected in my field. I've rebuilt everything Joel tried to destroy, and I've built it stronger than before. I've even started dating again, though I'm careful in ways I never used.
To be watching for warning signs and hidden motivations in everyone I meet. But there's a part of me that died in that conference room at Presidio Capital, watching Joel's hand on my shoulder while evidence of my supposed crimes accumulated on the screen. A part that believed in the kind of friendship where loyalty was absolute and betrayal was impossible. A part that trusted without constant verification, that loved without constant surveillance, that connected without constant fear. Joel took that from me, and no amount of federal prison time can give it back. So yes, I got my revenge. I exposed him. I helped prosecute him. I reclaimed my name and my career and my freedom. But we both lost something in that conference room, in that office, in that friendship that turned out to be a performance. The difference is I'm the only one who seems to understand what it cost.